Sea Arama Marineworld opened in Galveston, Texas on November 7, 1965. During the 1960s, city leaders recognized the need for Galveston to extend its tourist season beyond the May through September months. It became the first of several projects designed to boost year-round tourism on the island. Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Retro Pop Planet. I've been wanting to do one of these videos for a while because summer always reminds me of my trips to Sea Arama.
Oh, it's possible to see everything at Sea Arama Marineworld on Galveston Island in one day, if you're very fast. Sea Arama Marineworld is a world of family fun.
The park was located on 25 acres of land at 91st and Seawall. Once constructed, it was one of the nation's first ocean-themed parks. It was the first on the Gulf Coast and was also the first to offer 3 different locations: the Oceanarium, the Aquarium, and the Aqua Amphitheater. The $2 million park quickly became the top tourist attraction on the island. It was a really fun place. It was very open to groups, and I remember going with my daycare. We went a couple summers in a row until I stopped going to that daycare, but I remember they had this big black van, typical early 80s van with multiple rows of seats. The interior was red, and they would pack us up. Maybe there was 10 kids, all the older kids would get to go, and it would always be boiling temperatures. It was always so hot in Galveston in the middle of summertime. And I remember just how hot the tarmac was in the parking lot. We'd be wearing our shorts and you know, the style back then, you had the knee-high striped socks. Sea Arama was also the first to have a dolphin show pool. Lined with glass panels, it gave the audience a chance to observe the animals during feedings and shows. The main building featured a 50-foot deep, 200,000-gallon aquarium filled with exotic fish, turtles, electric eels, and even piranhas. Sea Arama offered visitors the chance to watch live alligator wrestling matches, a poisonous snake act, flying dolphins, and whale and dolphin shows from its 1,000-seat open-air theater. A crowd favorite was the finale of the Cobra show that involved a kiss of death between the snake and its handler. 2 of the most popular and memorable residents of Sea Arama in the 60s and 70s were its whales Nemo and Mamook. The Marine World also featured an octopus grotto, a petting zoo, and a lagoon with sharks and tropical birds. The park also had a man-made lake with a large grandstand at one end where visitors could watch hourly boat and water skiing shows. We would bring a sack lunch, and there was a little area reserved in the park, a picnic area, and I remember we would bring our sack lunches, and I would have my little brown bag with probably my Tech Sip box drink, and probably Doritos, either a bologna sandwich or even a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that my mom would have made. I remember the park had snack food, probably a little bit more expensive than what the daycare had wanted to spend. I don't remember what the entry fee was. It couldn't have been all that expensive. I definitely remember the dolphin show. That was the centerpiece of the entire park. I vaguely remember the aquarium. When you walk in, there was a lot of like saltwater fish. I don't really remember the alligator park. I vaguely also remember the reptile show and the bird show. In addition to the animal entertainment, Sea Arama held water ski shows with skiers doing tricks and comedy bits, puppet shows, and costume mascots such as Captain Sharky. Also available were tropical gardens, a petting zoo with kangaroos, goats, deer, sheep, and rabbits, an oleander garden designed in cooperation with the National Oleander Society, Alligator Island, Jean Lafitte's raft ride, gift and food shops, picnic, dining areas, and even a water toboggan slide. And if we got there on a good day, they would actually sit us and we would watch the jet skiers, the water skiers. Come to find out years later that my dad told me that one of my aunt's really, really good friends was one of those water ski performers. I don't remember that, unfortunately. Growing up on an island adjacent, one of the things that I definitely remember also in those summer times was going to see movies. Now, remember in the early 80s, they would release or re-release a lot of movies that had come out years earlier, and there wasn't the parental guidance like there is today. So I remember seeing Jaws when I was probably like 5 or 6 years old in the theater. It was a re-released version. And then I saw Jaws 3. I don't remember the 3D. I don't think our movie theater had 3D, but I definitely remember watching Jaws 3. And this one really hit home because going back years later, I found out that they actually filmed it at SeaWorld in Florida. And SeaWorld in Florida was actually very similar to Sea Arama. In fact, when Sea Arama closed, a lot of the animals from Sea Arama ended up being sold or licensed off. I don't know how they did it, but they actually ended up at SeaWorld, which is crazy to me because that movie reminded me so much of Sea Arama that it was kind of freaky in its own right. Even though the movie's not very good, it definitely was scary because the whole scene with the water skiers was exactly what Sea Arama was like. Style-wise, the same clothes, the same type of music. It's really wild. And so when I came across these videos online that people had posted of their personal collections, it really brought back some pretty deep memories.
Sea Arama had dealt with an increasing number of difficult issues over the years, including the husbandry of their larger animals like the whales and dolphins, having been kept in tanks that were deemed too small for their size. By 1988, attendance had begun to decline, especially since the opening of SeaWorld San Antonio the same year. In 1989, officials announced that they needed more money to maintain and improve the park's facilities. There was talk about the nearby Texas A&M Marine Studies program to take over and use as an educational facility, but those talks fell through, and on January 14th, 1990, the park closed for good.
Now, basically what replaced Sea Arama was a park called Moody Gardens, and it had a lot of the same features. However, it's much more, let's just say, friendly, environmentally friendly. They don't have the dolphins and some of the other things that we consider now to not be very humane. Equipment, the tanks are much larger. There's much more room for the animals to swim and grow and live. The other thing I do remember is the merchandise. I had this plastic cup for years and years. I don't know what happened to it. It probably just eventually got too brittle and broke and got thrown out. But that was my favorite drinking cup. I've looked on eBay over the years. I've never been able to find one like it. But I do have a couple cool things that I got in the very early days of eBay. Not saying you can't find this now on eBay. You can find all kinds of stuff. But in the very early days of eBay, I was just blown away that I could find merchandise, that people were selling this stuff out there. Now, the first thing I got was this Sea Arama Marineworld. This is probably from the 1960s. I believe it's supposed to be like a wall tile. You see how it has a little hang thing on the back? I don't even use it as a coaster. I just kind of put it on a table and it's just there. I think it's super cool. But this is a really cool piece of memorabilia. The oldest thing in my collection is probably this, I guess it's considered a shot glass or a drinking glass, Sea Arama Marineworld, Galveston, Texas. And then on the back, a whale of a drink, and it's got like the different sizes of drinks on here. Big Chief, only, Warriors, Young Bucks, Young Squaw, papooses. I don't know why it has Native Americans, other than maybe because the Karankawa Indians are from Galveston, or they were prevalent in Galveston. But if you look, you can definitely see this is old merchandise, because look how horribly the writing is on here. It's not even. It's very scattershot. It's funny, there's this one video online, and I sat and I watched the entire thing, and watching the young children on the grandstand watching the show, I was just like squinting, maybe I was in there. And literally
everybody in that group looked like kids that were probably my age, and you wonder what happened to those kids. Did you know any of those kids? Where do they come from? They had to have been local, right? Were they from a school trip or a daycare like mine? Even though I lived off the island, all of my relatives lived on the island, so we were constantly traveling on to Galveston. So even though I never went back to Sea Arama after probably 1986 or 1987, it had really gotten run down, and I remember it was considered not as nice as it had used to be, and there were other places to go. Plus we moved from Texas in 87, so that was kind of my hard break.
Once Sea Arama closed in 88, the property languished for years. Since it was located right next to the Gulf of Mexico, the salty air, storms, the sun and heat took their natural toll on the remaining buildings. The trees and plants ran wild, gradually taking over the entire site, turning it into a jungle. Even though what remained of the park was barely recognizable as a once-loved attraction, it enticed urban explorers to poke around, leaving their own marks in the form of graffiti and broken glass.
I remember going back in the early 2000s to visit. My brother and I went back. I looked up the address. We drove down the road. We pulled into the parking lot, and this is when the buildings were still standing. Before I knew what urban exploration was, this would have been the prime urban exploration spot. However, it was all overgrown. You could see the main building, and people had posted aerial photos, and it was super freaky. I remember thinking I didn't want to stick in the parking lot too long just because the whole area just gave me these like really creeped out vibes. I loved going back and finding all of these photos that these urban explorers had posted online of the graffiti and the old empty tanks. Totally fascinating stuff.
The remaining buildings sat vacant until 2006 when they were finally torn down, 16 years after the park closed. The site served as a temporary debris holding area after Hurricane Ike.
The last time I was in that area was in 2011. I had a work conference in Houston, and one of my friends met up with me, and I was just taking him around to all these places that I grew up with. On an offshoot, one day we drove down the island, and I wanted to see what remained of Sea Arama. Now, it had been torn down at this point, but the road still existed. You could still pull in, and you could still see the lines in the tarmac. The parking lot was still pretty much recognizable as a parking lot, and that was the last time I went. So recently, when I fell down this rabbit hole and I was doing research again on Sea Arama, I decided to go and do a Google image search. I'll show you here the rough idea of the locations where the different things were that you can see from the Google image, which basically just drives in through the parking lot and then stops. But you can see the property itself, which I think is fascinating that nothing has been developed there. It's just in a completely abandoned spot. I think it's prime real estate. I don't really know what the deal is with it, but as far as I know, it's still available.
We're going to start here on Seawall Boulevard because this was your primary roadway into the park. You can see how close we are to the Gulf of Mexico. And if we turn around, here was the main entrance. You can see there's a real estate agency advertising this site. The park was a little ways down this road. You can see there are remnants of a chain link fence. The fence was installed sometime after 2003 when I visited, and the buildings were still standing. I'm sure in a vain attempt to keep folks from exploring. This is roughly the same angle that this photo was taken from. Both of the man-made lagoons still exist, but are hard to see from the road. Behind these bushes was where all of the water skiing events took place. In this abandoned photo, the grandstand is still there, and the power lines are in the exact same position as the Google image. Actually, the power lines look to have been rewired. This is one of the wilder images. In this photo from the early 2000s, you can see a palm tree standing sentry to the long abandoned park. And in the Google Street View, the palm is now dead, but the dwarf palm has duplicated. The entrance to the parking lot was here on the left. Some of the parking lot is still recognizable apart from the main road, mainly by the differences in pavement, but the grass is clearly taken over here. It's also apparent that somebody is maintaining the property because the grass looks to have been cut recently based off this Google image.
I've spent some time trying to orient where I think the main entrance to the once great mid-century modern aquarium stood. I think it's where the road bends. Here's a photo from 1970, and one from the early 2000s, and then one from this year. The road just continues around to Stewart Road. My memory is hazy, but I recall this was the way that we exited the park. Let's do one last full overhead image. Here are the two lagoons. This one was used for water skiing. Now let's add the map of the park. Cool, huh?
I'll never forget just the constant sound of seagulls probably flying around the tanks, wanting fish, trying to get food, and just that, when seagulls get mad at each other, they are very loud. And I just remember just how loud the seagulls were as soon as you pulled up into that parking spot. I'll never forget my time there, and I just really enjoyed it. Is this a place that you went? Do you remember going here? Did you work at Sea Arama? Please post your memories in this feed. I'd like to get the conversation going.
If you'd like to learn more, I highly recommend you go to Amazon and purchase Tim Gould's book about the park. This isn't an ad, I'm just a fan.
I hope you enjoyed this memory as well. If you did, please give it a like. Leave me a comment again if you want to share your memories down below. And please feel free to hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.